Hello. All right, so today we are reading episode 3. And let's see. Wednesday we left off with Katerina and Dmitri deciding to continue on and look for Elizabeth, even though some people think that she's already dead. And it is Friday the 13th. So, spooky stuff. Okay, so I hope everyone is having a wonderful day today. I'm doing okay. I slept better last night than I did the night before, so that's good. Oh, and if you can see part of my shirt, yes, that is bacon. May all your bacon burn. I like the shirt. My sister got it for me. All right, let's start, shall we? The door of no return. Daniel. I looked at the man before me. Chains held him in place as I sneered at his broken body. The man's uniform was torn and bloody, hanging from the thin frame. I laughed as my man swung a nine-tails at the enemy's guard back, and the prisoner screamed, "Enough. That's enough for today." "Yes, sir." The torture man wound the nine-tails around his arm to store it in its rightful place. I turned back to the prisoner, who was almost unconscious. "Now, my boy, why don't you want to join me?" "You kidnapped my princess and me. Of course I would deny you." He coughed, and some blood fell onto the stone floor to join other dried stains. "I will not betray my king, and I will take my princess back to her family." I shook my head. "You'll be dead before you can take her back home." I acted disappointed, but inside I was really happy at the thought that he would be dead before he could take Elizabeth back to King Frederick. Poor King Frederick. I chuckled as I walked out of the dungeons of my son's castle. My son didn't know of my involvement of last year's fiasco, and I planned on keeping it that way. He didn't need to know. Now, if my grandson would follow the plan and stay in the secret room within my rooms, I thought, as I spotted this said boy sneaking around the hall. I walked up behind him and put my hand on his mouth. "What do you think you're doing?" "You're supposed to stay hidden." "Grandfather," he exclaimed as he pulled my hand from his mouth and turned to see me. "Shush," I scolded him as I led him back into my room. I looked around to make sure that no one had seen Eduardo. I didn't see anyone, so I hurried into the room behind him. Shutting the door, I turned on my grandson. "What were you thinking? If someone had seen you, they would know that I had helped you escape punishment." "Sorry, grandfather, but I wanted to see the little princess again. She isn't brought here anymore, and I wanted to see if she looked like Katerina." Eduardo looked up at me. "Why are you so obsessed with the Princess Katerina?" I asked. "I know that my father set up the contract that had her marrying either you or that other prince, but this is beyond my understanding. And why would you want to see if she looks like Katerina? Was this some kind of kink? I shuddered. Even I wasn't that horrible. But if he wanted to hurt the babies, to emotionally torture Katerina, then I still couldn't let him. I was just thinking that if she looked like Katerina, I could hurt her a little and take pictures to send to Katerina. I want to torture Katerina for getting engaged to the other guy. She humiliated me. His face darkened in an ugly anger. I can't let you do that, Eduardo. I shook my head and sat in my recliner. The fireplace was roaring gently with bright flames that spread warmth throughout the room. Not only have I already sent Elizabeth's old dress to her father as proof of her death, but I need her in the future, and I can't have you messing up my plans. I heard a knock, and I silently sent Eduardo to his secret room. When his door was shut and almost invisible, I stood and walked to the main door of my chambers. I opened the door and saw a maid. "Yes?" I asked. She didn't look at me, which is what I preferred. "The king wishes to speak to you," she replied calmly. I nodded. It was probably to speak about getting a husband for my eldest granddaughter. It was about that time. I shut my door and followed the maid to where my son was. "You wished to speak with me?" I asked my son with a smile. "Yes, father," said Daniel the third. "Was it to do with Mirabel's future husband?" I asked curiously. My smile was dropping with every second, and my son was just staring at me. "No, father," he said to me. "It's about you and Eduardo. You were found to be talking to Eduardo, whom I know to be a fugitive for the coup in King Julius's castle. May he rest in peace. You were overheard saying that you helped him escape punishment, and for that you were banished with him out of Neniring." He saw my mouth drop open, and he continued, "You are to take him to King Frederick and turn yourself in as well for the assistance you gave him." I couldn't believe that what I was hearing. I was being banished by my own son. "If you don't mind, I'd like for the two of us to leave in the morning after we rest tonight." My mind was whirling. "Of course, father. I wouldn't want you I wouldn't want to turn the two of you out at night. But you will be turning yourselves in, right?" my son asked. Inside, I was fuming, but outside I showed a cowed and regretful expression. "Of course, son. I'm sorry. I just couldn't bear to lose my grandson." "Understandable," my son said as he and my daughter-in-law nodded in sympathy. "Good night, my children." I bowed, and they dismissed me. Walking to my chambers, I decided to leave then, so I could bring my prisoner and the young princess with me under the cover of night. I would not leave them behind. Too much was at stake. When I got back inside my chambers, I called for Eduardo. He slid out of the secret room and raised an eyebrow. I told my grandson about the plan to leave that night, and I told him that we were taking the prisoner and the princess with us. Of course, Eduardo was unsure as to why we had to leave tonight, but I told him it was because we were discovered. My voice shook with anger as I told him the entire story of how my son, his father, had disgraced our family by sending us out. My son wants us to go and turn ourselves in to King Frederick. Instead, my grandson, we will be going out tonight with our prisoner and Princess Elizabeth and heading to my secret location. My grandson and I packed our bags. Then, as we walked to find the maid with the princess, we noticed that the other maids were not in the hall. We hurried to get the princess and her assigned maid, and then we went down to the dungeons, where some of my men were waiting for us. Let's get him ready to go. We leave tonight. Yes, sir. Under the cover of darkness, several men went and gathered the horses and a covered wagon. They got everything ready just in time for 5 figures to step out of the shadows of the castle. The 5th figure was so small that she could have been mistaken for an extension of the 4th figure. I motioned for the woman and child to get into the wagon, and when they were inside, I had one of my men help the prisoner into the wagon and stay with him. My grandson and I sat on the seat on the front of the wagon, and I picked up the reins of the horse that pulled it. My men surrounded us on horses as we quietly left the castle grounds. There was no going back when we left the castle. We had reached the door of no return, as we decided that no one was going to stop our plans, not even if they were family. Our plans, my plans, were not going to stop now because my son decided to kick me out of my home. I would go to my secret location and raise the princess how I wanted, and she would become my tool to getting the Peterson family to destroy themselves. I chuckled darkly as we left the capital city behind. Our journey to domination was just beginning. She's alive? Frederick. I couldn't believe that Dmitri had disobeyed me. It was 5 days after I was told that he had left, and I was still mad. I couldn't think straight, and even the rest of my family was avoiding me. They treated me like I was going to have them killed if they spoke against me. I paced in my office, thinking over everything that had happened since Elizabeth was taken, when a knock at the door had me calling out, "Come in." The door opened to show a familiar figure. It was Julie, the baker's wife. "Hello, Your Majesty." "Julie," I said. She looked haggard. "Your Majesty, I have 2 things to tell you. First, my husband has passed away." Her warm brown eyes looked so dark that they looked dead. My heart ached for her as I calmed down from my constant anger. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Baker." I had always found it interesting that her last name matched her husband's occupation, until now. It wasn't the time for this way of thinking, so I shook my head and asked, "Will you have enough support?" "I have a few people I can ask for support around the shop. My children will be there to support me as well." She took a deep breath. "The last thing I wanted to tell you is that I was doing a tarot reading, and I saw that the young princess is still alive." Her eyes got wide. "Katerina's still alive? That's good." I nodded and started to go back to my pacing. "Yes, she is, but that's not who I meant. I meant the young princess, Elizabeth." Julie looked at me with a somewhat stern look. "Your daughter is alive." My neck popped as I turned my head sharply to look at her. "Don't trick me, madam. Are you sure that my daughter is alive?" "I have her bloody dress right over there." I pointed to the bag that held the small dress. "I am absolutely sure that Princess Elizabeth is alive," Julie replied. She smiled to reassure me, I suppose, but I was lost. I sat down hard in my desk chair. "She's alive." I was shocked. My daughter wasn't dead. The bloody dress was a setup. I rang a small bell on my desk, and a guard arrived shortly after. "Gather my family. I have some good news," I told him. "Yes, Your Majesty." He saluted me with his arm across his chest. Then he left the office to go get my family. I turned back to Julie. Thank you, Julie, for telling me the good news. I wish you a safe journey back, and I wish you well. Julie curtsied and left the room. I watched her as she left. Maybe I went a little crazy before I knew that my daughter was alive. Maybe I should talk to the Pope about what I had done, what I had gone through, and I'm still going through, I asked myself before the rest of my family got to my office. Natalia's eyes were puffy and red again. She had been crying again, I saw. Her eyes begged me to put her out of her misery, and my heart pained. I had a visit from Julie just now. She let me know that her husband passed away, but she saw on the cards that Elizabeth is alive. I tried to lighten the mood slightly, but they didn't seem to get the news I wanted to share. Charlie's dead? Mother asked. Charlie Baker and Julie had been married for about 55 years or so, I knew. We kids only knew him as Mr. Baker. Yes, Mother, I replied. That's so sad, Nat- Natalia said, holding a handkerchief to her eye. I sighed. I think you're almost in the point. Elizabeth is alive. They stared at me, complete silence. Then pandemonium. Blake and Derek started jumping up and down in excitement. They were cheering. Thomas smiled slightly, likely not knowing how to react. George smiled as well, but his eyes held a slightly wet look. But it was the women that drew my attention the most. Both my wife and mother were openly crying. She's really alive? Mother asked, holding on to Adeline snugly and putting her other arm around Natalia. According to Julie, yes, she's alive. I opened my arms and Natalia slid out of my mother's arm and into my hole. I noticed that Mother smiled and put her arm back around Adeline. Then I buried my face into Natalia's neck. As soon as Elizabeth was found and Katerina Dmitri came back, the whole family would be together again, safe and sound. After we got calmed down again, I made sure that we were all on the same page about how we would get Katerina, Dmitri, and Elizabeth back to the castle. Then we all went to eat dinner. My family was so excited and were all talking about what we would do to celebrate their return. I was slightly skeptical about how easy it all seemed. I was worried about how fast we would get our missing family members back. I was worried that it would take forever to get Elizabeth back. Then, when Elizabeth did get back to them, would she remember them? Would she be speaking? Would she be walking by then? I stared at my food as I ate, wondering about what my baby girl might be going through at that moment. My thoughts wandered as I sat there. My family were all eating and talking in excitement, but I couldn't join in. George turned to me and got my attention. Frederick, what are you thinking about? I'm just worried about how long it will take to find and bring Elizabeth back home. I looked over at my younger brother. Will she be here in a month? Will it be a year? Or maybe even longer? George sighed in understanding. Anything can happen, brother. Let's not borrow trouble. Let's just pray for her safe return. I nodded. You're right. I should just have faith. George smiled. Yes, we all should. He turned back to his food, and we all continued our dinner before we went our separate ways for the evening. I spent my evening in the chapel, praying for Elizabeth's safe return. My knees were probably hurting, but I didn't feel it. My mind wasn't focused on my body or my surroundings. My mind was focused on my prayer and meditating. My breathing slowed and deepened as I relaxed. Footsteps walked up behind me, and a body lowered beside me, bringing me out of my meditation. I turned my head. It was Natalia, who gave me a small smile before turning to look straight ahead at the stained glass window. Another body lowered to my right, and I looked to see Mother kneeling beside me, without Adeline, who was probably in bed already. I turned back to the stained glass window and went back to praying and meditating. I had fully relaxed again, but my senses said that the rest of the family had joined me in prayer, even Blake. With all of us praying, I was sure that our prayers would be answered. My worries left me as I continued to pray. Life would show us the answer to all questions we might have. We would be fine. We had to be. When Elizabeth came back home with Katerina and Dmitri, we would celebrate for a week. Searching for her, Katerina. I looked over at Dmitri as we crossed into Nanairi. This is where things would get dicey. If we angered King Daniel, Marquis III, and his wife, we could be captured or banished forever, which would make it difficult for Dmitri to go back to his parents' castle or to visit me if we were separated. I took a deep breath to relax, and we headed deeper into the country. I was anxious to find my niece and get her back home. We found ourselves in a marketplace, surrounded by stalls of food and goods, and I asked a lady, "Excuse me, have you seen a group of men with a small baby girl?" The woman thought back a bit and replied, "I think I saw a group like that about a week ago. They were headed towards the castle. Did that help?" My face was pale, I was sure, as I said, "Yes, thank you." I turned to Dmitri. "Come on, let's go. Eduardo has her now." Dmitri nodded grimly. He, like me, didn't like the thought of Eduardo and Daniel Marquis Jr. having Elizabeth in their grasp. I led the way in a straight path toward the castle. It would be about 3 or 4 days to get there, but I was determined to make it a shorter trip. Along the way, I would continue to pretend to be a fortune teller to remain inconspicuous. A few hours later, Dmitri stopped me. "Let's stop for a while. We need to rest, eat, and drink. And we need to come up with a plan." I sighed. He was right. We needed to stop at the next village to reconnect with our quest. "Okay," I said. "Let's get to the next village and then we'll stop." He nodded. As we continued walking, he whistled to keep us in high spirits. I smiled as I joined my voice to his whistling, letting my voice encompass us in a light, happy feeling. We needed this to break away from the dire outlook we had on this journey. Time seemed to fly as we walked because we made it to the next village in no time. I walked over to a man that I saw. "Hello, sir. I'm a traveling fortune teller and this is my companion. May we set up a tent in the village? And is there anywhere that we can set up?" The man looked us over, noticing the dirty and worn clothes. I could tell that he didn't have any suspicions about us being royalty, because he obviously thought we were just what I had said we were. "Sure. Follow me. I'll lead you to a good spot." "Thank you," Dmitri and I said at the same time. We smiled at each other as we followed the man to the center of the village. He led us to a spot that was just a little ways away from the other tents and stalls. "Thank you so much, sir," I said happily. This spot was perfect. "Call me Sam," the man said, "and it's no problem. I'm happy to see more people come to our small village." "We're happy to spend a few days here, Sam," Dmitri said with a smile. He gently squeezed my hand in warning. Good, good. Sam smiled happily. Well, I'll leave you to it. You can get started as soon as you set up if you want. Thanks. Bye. Bye, kids. Sam walked off to see what else was going on around the village. I looked at Dmitri as we started to put up the tent that I had bought in another village. What were you thinking when you said we were staying here for a few days? We need to gather information. This way we can make money for the trip and gather information at the same time, Dmitri replied. True, I said, as we set up the tent and put all of the items for fortune telling inside the tent. I made sure that I had everything set up in a way that flowed and made the tent mysterious inside. When we were done setting up, I changed inside the tent while Dmitri stood outside to gather customers. Hey everyone, do you want your fortunes told? Come on over here and see the lovely Rena. Rena? I thought to myself. Well, I guess it works. It's better than my full name. Dmitri was bringing in lots of young ladies with his looks. He let the first girl into the tent after checking that I was ready, leaving the flap open for airflow, and then he waited with the rest of the small crowd. Hello, my dear. Please sit, I said, motioning to the cushion before me. She looked at me in awe and asked, Will I ever find a husband? Let's see, shall we? I asked with a smile. I shuffled my tarot deck, pouring my energy into the cards to get the answer that the girl needed. As I laid the cards down one by one on a low box, the girl leaned closer to look at each card. The cards show a childhood friend that's been really close to you for a long time. He's been waiting for you to make a move since he's been making all the moves thus far. Her face scrunched up in confusion. There's someone that you have your eye on, but they haven't noticed you yet. You'll have a difficult choice ahead of you. On one hand, there's the sweet guy that loves you with all his heart. On the other hand, there's a guy that will never give you the attention you deserve. Only you can make this decision, but if you choose true love, then there are wedding bells in your future. The girl squealed and looked up at a sign I had hung up on the tent wall. Seeing the price for the card reading, she handed me the money, saying, Thank you so much, Madam Rena. She skipped outside to happily tell her friends what I had read for her. I looked back at the cards and sighed at the shadow still on one of the cards. The inside of the tent was pretty bright, so there should not have been a shadow on any of the cards. Something bad was going to happen. But the girl would not have wanted to hear that. I shook my head as I shuffled the cards again after putting away the money. The next girl came in and looked around before sitting. I don't actually believe in this stuff. Could you do a random reading for me to see if it's legit? Sure, I replied, looking at her and studying her face as I shuffled the cards for her reading. I started laying them out and noticed something dark, but there were other happier messages in the cards. You've lost someone dear to you recently, probably earlier this month. The girl's eyes widened in shock. You have some good friends that have surrounded you with love and good times, and you are wondering when the other shoe will drop. Maybe because your old friends stopped being your friends over something bad that happened to you when you were younger. The girl was scared of how accurate the reading was, but she didn't say anything. I still didn't look up at her, so I didn't see her face. But her hands were clenched tightly. You have a lot of confusion in you, but you'll get past it. Her hair moved suddenly as she leaned closer, but jerked her head to look at my face. My eyes were on the cards. I see someone hiding in the shadows, not to hurt you, but to watch over you. This person is someone that you know, but haven't really spoken to. I smiled slightly. They will help you with your confusion and fears. I looked up at her then and saw the wonder on her face. How could you? She stopped, swallowed, and spoke again. Thank you for the reading. She was obviously confused and surprised. Then she handed me the money for the card reading and left. I smiled slightly as I put away the money and shuffled the cards. The next few days passed in the same way, with Dmitri going to the inn's bar every night to get the gossip. No, pardon me. To get the gossip that men often gave when drunk, before we started to pack up to continue our journey. It was time to head towards the castle again to get news of Eduardo and Elizabeth. Walking into the inn that night, I saw Dmitri talking to some guys at the bar. Smiling, I walked over to him and draped myself over Dmitri's back. Hello, love. Having fun? His companion smirked or whistled at my actions, but Dmitri turned his head with a grin. Yes, Rena, why don't you join us? I say. I would, but we have to leave tomorrow morning, so why don't we have some fun of our own tonight? Yeah, allergy season. I would, but we have to leave tomorrow morning, so why don't we have some fun of our own tonight? I was hoping that he would understand the hidden meaning behind my words. His buddies laughed and teased us, and Dmitri smiled. Sure, he said, getting up and letting me straighten up. Let's go. He wrapped his arm around my waist, and we turned to the stairs. When we got to my room and shut the door, we started laughing. Good show, my love. Thanks, hon. I walked over to my bed and sat down. I patted the bed beside me and said, So, what have you found out? Dmitri walked over and sat down beside me, saying, Well, tonight I found out that Daniel Marquis Jr. had a few mysterious visitors almost a week ago, but the visitors were not seen leaving the castle. No one knows what happened to the visitors, only that it was 4 adults and a baby. 4? I looked over at him. So Eduardo was waiting for them somewhere, and they all went to the castle together? It looks like it. Dmitri moved his hand onto mine. What do you want to do? I want to go to the castle now and get Elizabeth back. My eyebrows furrowed and my mouth frowned as I thought about my niece in that situation. Okay, Dmitri said. We leave early tomorrow morning. Oh, I also bought us a couple of horses. so it shouldn't take as long to get to the castle. I nodded. We need to be careful when we get there. We don't want to anger the king. He could have you sent back to your family and bar us from crossing the Nairi ever again. That would mean that I stopped as my heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to continue. That we could be separated forever, Dimitri understood. He knew he would understand. I knew he would understand my fears. I will never let that happen. We won't anger the king. We will politely ask him to give us the kidnappers, Eduardo, and the king's father for justice. I took a deep breath. You're right. I shouldn't worry so much. We talked for a long time, discussing our plans for the next day, and before we knew it, we were asleep on top of the covers, cuddling each other. Neither of us moved even once as the night passed slowly into day. The island, Daniel. We rode for a few days to the north, where I knew of a small barge that would take us across a part of the sea. The only problem was that we wouldn't be able to take the wagon. We would have to leave the wagon behind. I scowled as I waited for my men to catch up to come. Wait. As I waited for my man to come so that we could cross to the island. Sire, said a younger man, coming from the shadows by the only building there. It was an old fishing hut that the fishermen came to descale and cut up their catch of the day. You're late. Your grandfather was never this late, I glared at the boy. Sorry, sire, he bowed to me. The barge is ready when you are. Let's just put the wagon at the side of the building to hide it. Very well. I got down from the wagon, as did Eduardo, and I walked to the back of the wagon where the maid and one of my guards were watching over Elizabeth. We're going, I said. They got out of the wagon and we all took the horses towards the water. The barge was large enough for all 8 of us, the boy that was moving the barge, and all 5 horses. The wagon would have been too heavy for the barge with all of us as well. I could see. Well, it would have to do. Let's go. I led the way onto the barge and waited as everyone settled. When the barge started moving forward across the sea, I looked back at the shore. Man, I hope that brat of a princess didn't follow us. Turning back to face the way we were going, I waited for the island to appear. It was my own secret hideout because I found the island when I was younger and had some people build my base of operations on it. Those builders eventually died of old age before my son was born, so I didn't have to worry about them telling anyone where I was headed. As the island came into view, I looked upon its small shores. It was a small island with a semi-sprawling house upon it, and trees everywhere. There would be enough room in the house for me, my grandson, my men, the maid, and Elizabeth. Down in the basement was the dungeons area where my prisoner would stay until his dying day. The barge came to a stop on the shore of the island, and we disembarked. The boy that operated the barge said, Sire, I'll come over every few days to check to see if you need anything. There should be enough food to last a little while, but let me know if you need anything. I will. I nodded to him in dismissal. The boy bowed to me and then pushed the barge backwards off the island shore and went back to where we departed from. He disappeared from sight shortly, and I knew he would be back to the mainland soon. I also knew that according to the agreement that I had with the boy's grandfather, the boy wouldn't speak about taking my group over here. I led everyone to the house and said, Someone take our prisoner down to the dungeons. It will be his last home. I chuckled as I walked into the house and towards the living room. Maid, hand me the child. When she did, I looked down at the baby in my arms. You, my dear, will grow into a wonderful young lady. I will raise you to be just like me. We will rule the world and you shall be queen. I smiled down at the baby. Her family didn't even know that she was alive. When Elizabeth grew up, she would surprise them, and when they brought her into their arms, she would kill them. It was the perfect plan. I couldn't wait to put it in motion. I chuckled in anticipation. I thought of all the things I would do when Elizabeth was old enough to follow my orders. She would rule the masses, and I would be the one telling her what to do. I handed Elizabeth over to the maid when the baby started crying. The child was probably hungry. I couldn't wait until she was old enough to walk and talk. Maybe this would take longer than I wanted. I explained my plans to Eduardo and my guards. Eduardo wasn't happy about Elizabeth being above him in power in my future plans, but I quieted him down with words of having special plans for him, which I couldn't share just yet. That was a lie, of course, but he didn't need to know that. Maybe I would kill him when he outgrew his usefulness. I watched as he walked out the back door to the water. My guards dispersed as well. That was a thought. And there we go. We have the end of episode 3. And next episode, Monday, we will find out what happens when Katerina and Dmitri reach Nanari Castle. So, we just finished the 10th chapter of this story. And next time will be 11 through 13. And to be honest, I can't stop looking at this cover. It's beautiful. At least I think so, anyway. Alright, so let me put this back over here. I hope you enjoyed today's reading, and I hope you continue to watch my other videos in this series. I'm really happy that people are liking my books. Let's see. I'll put a link in the description if I haven't already about how to find this book if you want to read along with me. I already have a series of reading Rebel that is complete. And after episode 13 of this series, Reading Order, I will start reading Youth. So, yay! Alright, I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, or night, or wherever you are, and I shall see you Monday.